The Detroit Lions have been the laughingstock of the NFL for years. Although they have had star players like Calvin Johnson and Barry Sanders, they have never been able to put it all together and make a push for the Lombardi Trophy. However, pre-Super Bowl era, the Lions were one of the best teams in the league thanks to their star quarterback, Bobby Layne. But on October 7th, the Detroit Lions would take a turn for the worse and become the awful franchise that NFL fans know and love. This is the curse of Bobby Layne. Bobby Layne was the quarterback of the Detroit Lions in the 1950s. Bobby Layne was very ahead of his time and has even been referred to as the Brett Favre of the 1950s. Buddy Parker, coach of the Detroit Lions at the time, made a trade for Tobin Rote, a quarterback younger than Bobby Layne. Whatever Buddy Parker had in mind for Layne and Rote never happened, as Parker abruptly resigned as the Lions head coach in August of 1957, calling the Lions the worst team I've ever seen in training camp, and telling reporters that they had no life, no go, and that it's a completely dead team. Offensive assistant George Wilson, a close friend of Layne's, took over as head coach. Layne expressed his unhappiness with the acquisition of Rote, similar to the Aaron Rodgers-Jordan Love situation going on in today's NFL. Bobby Layne and Tobin Rote split reps for most of the season in what was one of the first quarterback controversies in NFL history. However, during the season, Bobby Layne broke his leg in an important game against the Browns late in the season, so Tobin Rote became the full-time starter. Rote went on to lead the Lions to the 1957 NFL Championship this year, while Bobby Layne was on their sideline. The last championship the Lions would see for a long time. To start the 1958 season, the Lions planned on having two very good quarterbacks going into the year, Bobby Layne and Tobin Rote. But after a 13-13 tie against the Packers, Lions head coach George Wilson was sick of both quarterbacks' terrible decision-making and play calling. To make things worse for Layne, the quarterback would show up to meetings that week clearly intoxicated, and George Wilson had had enough. Buddy Parker, the former coach of the Lions, then went on to coach the Steelers, where he called up George Wilson of the Lions on October 6th of 1958. The conversation went like this. George Wilson asked, "Would you like to trade for a quarterback?" Mr. Parker responded by asking who. And George Wilson said, "Bobby Layne." Buddy Parker was shocked, and by the end of the phone call, Bobby Layne was a Steeler, and the Lions were going to roll with Earl Morrall, who was the second pick in the 1956 draft. George Wilson and the Lions did not tell their star quarterback he was traded before the trade was made. Instead, George Wilson was able to connect with Layne while he was at an airport in Detroit waiting for his wife to arrive. Wilson claimed that he had wanted to tell Layne when he stopped in to pick up his paycheck, but Layne never showed up as he was at the airport. Remember, this is the 1950s and communication is nowhere near what it is today. Layne wasn't the only one who was upset by the trade. His teammates were shocked as well. Joe Schmidt, linebacker at the time, says, "I think it's a big mistake. He's a damn good quarterback." That Tuesday, Layne packed his bags for Pittsburgh, and Rote pulled his leg in practice. Although the quote was never recorded by anyone, it has been said that Layne, on his way out, said the Lions would not win for 50 years, and thus, the curse begins. Since 1958, the Lions have had just 18 winning seasons, 1 playoff win, 0 Super Bowl wins, and 0 Super Bowl appearances. They are one of 2 teams in NFL history to go 0-16. Their 0-16 season came 50 years after the statement was made. It has now been 62, and the Lions have just 1 playoff win. Several of their best players have wasted their careers in Detroit, and some have even retired early, like Barry Sanders and Calvin Johnson, at the age of 31 and 30, respectively. So one must ask themselves, can the Lions blame over half a decade of misery on a statement that isn't even confirmed, or is it all just one big coincidence? Whatever it is, it's a crazy story. One of the craziest in the NFL. But that does it. Thank you for watching, and please hit the subscribe button, give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed, and leave a comment. Ask us what you want to see in future videos, and we'll do our best to make it happen. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.